Hello, this is Pat O'Mara with Inveniam Capital Partners, and I'm with my coworkers, Rick Bunker, the CTO of Inveniam, Kevin Cutterback, our Chief Data Scientist, and Patrick Sprouse, who uh, runs our solutions business. And we are here today to talk a little bit about Inveniam 2.0, which is really a large rollout of Albert Verdellen's contributions to our solution, but unfortunately, he is not with us today, and he'll be able to join us next week where we'll do a follow-on presentation. But we're going to walk through a little bit of what we do. And so why don't we start at the highest level, right? Where we talk about what is Inveniam, what do we do, where we are a solution, everything from the real world asset to the token in a federated data environment. So if you don't have data that sits in a referenceable database, yet you want to inform uh, uh, automation or computational tools, whether it's a smart contract, AI, ML, RPA, and you need context, attribution, and trust in a decentralized data environment, Inveniam is the mechanism to do that at scale. And we're really excited to have everybody here. And Rick, why don't we start with you? And I'm just going to throw it over to you at the highest level, when you meet somebody new and you talk about what does Inveniam do, give us a little bit about that. What does Inveniam do? What is the value proposition of Inveniam as we do this? And let's talk a little bit about Inveniam as we started, and then kind of this new Inveniam 2.0 and what these capabilities are that we can deliver.
Sure. So Inveniam is a tool for companies that have to manage a lot of unstructured data. We focused on the capital markets in the first place because, especially when dealing with alternative investments or private market investments, they're the same thing, just two different names, like commercial real estate, private companies, private credit agreements, etc. People are overwhelmed with a lot of unstructured data, meaning Excel spreadsheets, PDF documents, of DocuSigned agreements or PowerPoint presentations, et cetera, et cetera. And yet all of these unorganized, unstructured documents contain the vital information that define the assets they've invested in and have to manage. And they're always changing because every month there's a new report of income, a new report of expenses, new contracts, new leases, new property condition reports or certificates of occupancy or insurance documents, etc. And so not only is the information unstructured, but it's unorganized and it comes from a variety of different sources and they're overwhelmed. So the first thing we do is help them get that under control. We've built tools to look at the information where it lives. You don't have to make yet another copy, email another set of things, worry about the gold. We point at the document where it lives now. We create a virtual data room. We call it our federated data room, which can be looking in several different places, right? We can look at the property manager and at the portfolio manager and at the limited partners who own it, whatever, the different disk drives. Create a virtual organization of that stuff and can set permissions on it at the edge. So coming into our portal, we can say investors can see this, accountants can see this, insurers can see this, etc. We then have workflows which assign tasks and keep track of, okay, to initially onboard an asset, here's all the stuff you have to get. Here are all the sign-offs and approvals you have to get. And then every month you better get this, and every quarter this, and every year this, and pester the heck out of people. I almost said something else. To keep that information flowing, right? And permission that access. So that's where we started, and that's already, we think, very valuable. But what our clients have told us is, that's great, but we really wish we could use this information to feed into our portfolio accounting system or to send information off to the appraiser to get a mark to market once a quarter or something, to send the information off to a lender because we want to raise, mezz debt. And so we built tools to do that, to identify. We have our subject matter expert say, well, boy, in a lease, a commercial rent lease. It's 120 pages of stuff, all of which is important to a lawyer, but it turns out there are only, these, I don't know, Patrick, 45 pieces of information out of that lease that we'd want to load into our property management system or put into our risk analysis or use to generate a report of when the leases are going to fall off, that kind of, right? So we first build a tool that would allow and make it efficient for our employees to go into that lease and find these things and structure them. And then we could share that with the client. Now we find that we could get better and better at that. We could make it better. We first found an AI tool called Textract, which is not one of these generative AIs like ChatGPT or something, but it's really good at understanding spreadsheets, understanding that this number is in this column and this row. So it means we don't just see this number 1, 2, 3, 4 hanging out there. We know it's Pat O'Mara's rent payment for July of 2024, right? And we applied that, and we saw for spreadsheets, for table heavy documents, at 10 times. Literally, it was more than a 10x, like 10.8x, something like that, improvement in productivity in our extracting these things. So we're feeling pretty good about that. And then we've seen this generative AI, this really kind of huge state change in the quality of the generative AI. And so now we find that by carefully pre-processing the information to get it ready for generative AI, using a technique called RAG, retrieval augmented generation, to set the scope or the context of a question to the AI very carefully, and then using AI, submitting that to the AI, we can start to get answers to find, what did I say, 41, the 41 data elements automatically. And then I should say, then a lot of post-processing, because the AI will deliver it back with a bunch of extra words and we have to get it right for a database. But we're now, instead of saying, okay, here's this lease, we're going to put it in the queue and we're going to have our employees spend, an hour and 20 minutes finding this data. And tomorrow you'll see the data artifact, we call it, the structured data. Now we can say, boom, send it off to the AI, and 5 minutes later you get it back. We still have to QA it and stuff, but we're actually building techniques to have a different AI check the initial results of the first AI and get very, very good at it. And that's a state change for us. That means that we can ingest a lot more data a lot cheaper and faster, which means if the manager of a portfolio of private credit agreements has 8,000 now and thinks, oh my God, I could double my business except my back office would melt, we have a way to save them, right? And if I'm going on too long, just tell me to shut up. But in the process of doing what I've just described, right, there's a step along the way where you take each document, that 125-page document, and you break it into pieces. We use, think, paragraphs, right? The techies talk about chunks, but this is an unpleasant word. Elements, or we'll just say paragraphs. So you break it into these semantically related blocks of text, and then you generate vector embeddings. You generate this cloud of numbers which can tell an AI what it means and store that all in a database. We then use that database to find the answer to the 41 questions, right? To extract the data artifact. But the beautiful side effect is we now have this database, which has the document already broken into paragraphs and with vector embeddings, so ready for this retrieval augmented generation. And we can open it up just to allow a user to enter a query. And Pat, the results are remarkable. I can load up an appraisal of a building and its budget and its a document about cash distributions or something and say, why is the rent so low? And then it jumps in October, and it'll look through it. It'll say, well, according to the appraisal, there are renovations going on right now. And there are 26 units that will have renovations completed in September. And if you look at the budget, you'll see a big increase in advertising. in September to try to fill these things up. And then we see that the percentage of occupancy increase in October, November, December, giving us a final run rate of this. And that results in an appraisal of the current state and an appraisal in the stabilized state after the renovations. It feels like magic, Pat. It's wonderful. And so anyway, that's what we want to get.
Yeah, and Rick, this, and we're going to talk about where we're going to get, where we get to interrogate an entire data room.
Yes.
And it's not an entire data room that is static. It's an entire data room that is constantly being updated. We can see the most current rent roll, so that the AI, we can provide the context for different AI tools to only use the most the most recent version, right? And what we can do is, in the context of the question, they can go in, and there's 1,200 documents that are going in, and we're looking into 6 databases, 3 databases, 12 databases. And if we've been embedding the vectoring, right, of that information about the chunks of data, literally what you're doing is, I, as an asset owner, can prepare my data for AI to be used, and not one AI at an enterprise level, but I can use the inference function of ChatGPT, Anthropic, Watson X, whatever I'm choosing to use, and literally I'm preparing my data.
The llama stuff does a better job with spreadsheets, so we can use it for them. Yes, that's true. But by the way, not only everything you said is correct, right? So this is the improv thing, the yes and. We also apply our permissions. So Inveniam has invested, God knows how much money, millions, in this permissions system, where we can say for an organization, here are the people, and Patrick is in this role. He's an admin. He can just see everything. Kevin's an investor, so he can see all the information about the asset and the performance, but he can't see all of the limited partnership agreements with the other limiteds, and he can't see their capital contribution or capital account status, right? And Pat O'Mara, he's an appraiser. He doesn't need to see, everything, whatever. You chunk it up however you want, and you set the permissions. And so when we do the AI work, we end up with, a first query is against the summary of all the documents to pick which documents are going to be in the scope of the conversation. And we check.
This is a conversation between tools, maybe between people, but a person or a template asks the question of an AI tool that, through our RAG, right, retrieval augmented generation, is going to go ask our system, which is what an asset owner is using to prepare their data to answer the question of the other AI agent, right?
It could be another AI, or it could just be an analyst working there. In either case, we rigorously put a hard wall around the context based on their permissions. So if you only have permission to see information about the asset, but not to see who all the other investors are and what their capital account, and distribution and what their side letters are in the data room, the AI, it'll only know about that same scope of information when you query the AI. And the final icing on the cake is we keep a provenance of every bit of information. So when you ask the AI and get a particular answer, we can point you back to the source document that answer came from, so you can actually trust it.
And this is important. And Kevin, I'm going to tee this next question up to you. This is incredibly important because what we're doing is we're preparing enterprises to maintain their own data so that they can share it and use multiple large tools. So you have these big entities, G42. I'm in Abu Dhabi. I'm sitting in Abu Dhabi right now. G42 has the world's largest commercially available computational system, right? That all open AI inference is done on. But for a corporation, an enterprise, to use that, they either need to send their raw data over to G42, who creates your vector database, but then you've lost control, and the big sovereign wealth funds and pension funds and big asset owners or GPs are failing to maintain their data and their data retention policy and their GDPR responsibilities. This allows somebody to have the vector embedding on one side of their firewall, but then use the inference function on the other side of the firewall. And Kevin, as we think about this, right, the big difference between public market and private market is data quality, right? And the discount that you get on a private market asset is roughly 30%. There's a ton of data on this, right? That there's a discount for a lack of marketable information on an asset. And if you don't trust the data, typically in a first world country, that discount is 30%. In public markets, we have Edgar that's updated every quarter, and people read the tea leaves and trying to figure out what the company's next official filing is going to be. These private markets, using our tools, people can get daily updates, literally going in and seeing every night, has there been any change of state in data from the official systems, and then kick off a workflow. But as this happens, you're going to see private market assets perfect their data, and as they perfect their data, come closer to public market assets as far as cap rates, multiples, etc., with better data and the ability to use all these AI tools to interrogate, for a big sovereign wealth fund, the 50,000 assets that they have. Here's the 10 questions I want to ask everybody, every single asset. And as we think about this, Kevin, how does the perfecting of data change the value of an asset, and how does it change how private markets are going to relate to public markets, and this whole piece about a decentralized versus centralized data solution? I know that I literally gave you enough for talk for an hour. Sorry.
Well, just focusing on it, how does the perfecting of data change the value of the asset is a great question, and I also want I want people to realize that the way in traditional private market transactions, the way you would perfect the data was that you would hire expensive, time-consuming due diligence, right? That due diligence is this idea that an accountant comes in and looks at the data and essentially says, makes sense to me, looks true enough. Looks true enough to be true, and that the lawyers come in and say they have a certificate of good standing, that these documents seem to be in order. So it's really about, and then you can ask the accountant or the lawyer, does it make sense? Can you answer key questions for me? So the really cool thing is that the AI is starting to be able to answer those same questions that you used to rely on a human, time-consuming due diligence process. And actually, where the owner was still making the same representation. This is my most recent quarterly report. This is my, here is my certificate of incorporation. Our system is actually better than that because, we can track the versions of these documents over time. If a document should be from the past, in our system, it usually will have an old timestamp and proof that it hasn't changed, which I think is better, a better thing to be able to show than the lawyer read this copy and it made sense to them. That's different than saying that is the right copy. Was the lawyer reading the right copy? So those two things together are really powerful and exciting. That not only are we able to have to perfect the document essentially through AI diligence, but also that the documents themselves are sort of in better order, and potentially fresher, and better version control than they were when it was all just a big banker's box.
Yeah, and you had to trust a brand, or you had to trust a process, that this was the most recent version, and that this law firm tells you this is the most recent version, and every day that goes by, that data gets stale, right? And when there's a transaction, you buy a building, you trade something on a private market asset, and you have all of the vendors validate, yep, this is the right data, and we're going to close it, and that is the new market price for that asset, for the building, where there's a gross asset value, but then the net asset value for all the pieces of the capital stack. every day that goes by and a piece of information that has a whole lot of dependencies on it changes, you're not maintaining that. With Inveniam, we're literally looking at those data elements every night, powering workflows that you were seasoning that data, not allowing it to get stale. And this really matters because when you do a valuation for the gross asset value of a large real estate asset, let's take as an example, which is collateral for private credit, or it's for we're going to trade the equity, or there's going to be a derivative created, or it's part of a portfolio. You need to understand, here's the gross asset value, but of the 41 items, maybe only 3 changed month to month, right? And those 3 things that changed impact the asset. And then the other data elements you need are the market related elements. And so, Patrick, let's talk for a minute about, we have a top 15 bank as a client. Every one of their loans in the United States that is powered by a total return swap is on our platform, and we're updating those values real time. Talk to us a little bit about the increase in speed and efficiency from, 1 mark a year to these more regular marks, and you just see the difference. How does this translate, while also they maintain the integrity and they retain the data in their own systems? They're not having to email it to somebody else.
Right. So I think there's 3 things that really speed up the process to where you said we take things from annual valuations to monthly or quarterly marks. One is, as you said, the data is not moving. So we're taking away that bilateral exchange of, here's the latest document, it's in your inbox. If a new version is created or updated, you're relying on the client or the lender to send that new version. You're reaching out, you're emailing, is this rent roll really the latest one? When we're connecting directly into the source, we're taking away that need. The second thing is we're removing a lot of steps in the process. So the former process of, here's the document, put it in Excel, send it for approval, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now we're saying, here's the version of the document. It's been extracted. We don't have to, rely on someone at the property manager or at the bank to take a rent roll, read through hundreds of lines of leases, find the difference between, this lease, this unit was vacant last month, and now, this tenant is in there. A rent roll might of hundreds of lines of leases might have a couple changes month to month. The previous process was to read through all of those in the old rent roll compared to the new rent roll. When you're extracting all of that data automatically and comparing those 2 versions together, we're taking that entire process, that entire step out of the process. So we're no longer saying, to the valuator at Cushman & Wakefield, you need to find the differences, sort of like those games on a menu, find the difference between these 2 in a sea of thanks, Kevin. In a sea of leases. We're just saying, these are the ones that changed month over month. So we're taking that appraisal from weeks to days, or in some cases hours, because we're taking that 10-finger automation part, that data entry part out of it, and we're just allowing the appraisers to focus on what they like to do, which is the arts part of it, the comps, the
real intelligence, right?
Exactly,
Patrick,
exactly.
And if we can use AI, where there was this really long process that you stuck a brand on and there was real intelligence, that real intelligence actually only needs to be applied to a very limited number of functions. And if we can use AI to power real intelligence with the thing that the real intelligence needs to be applied to, where there's real judgment, right? Where there's real analytics, all of a sudden we explode the value of that person who has the judgment that the market wants. They don't want the person who has judgment about the state of the market to spend their time in data collection and data entry and data, comparative analytics. And as we break the entire process into these micro processes, this opens the door for AI to power this real intelligence. But Rick, as we do this, let's talk a little bit more about how big of a deal is federated data in this, right? Because we're no longer demanding that everything be in one giant data lake. You know what I mean? In order to do this, but rather we can look into different systems, right? And as data is proliferating at scale, and people don't want to hand their data over, they don't want to because of privacy concerns, or they can't because of legal concerns or contractual obligations, that they have data retention and data destruction policies that they must meet. And this allows people to use these brand new AI tools while maintaining control of their data the entire time. How big of a deal is this for the large banks and the asset owners, I should say?
I think it's huge, right? First, it's huge because many of them have grown through acquisition or are organized in ways that different parts of their company operate very independently. And so, we've seen clients where we have to have multiple connections just inside one enterprise, right? Because they've got a SharePoint over here and a SFTP over there, and they're using a Dropbox or an S3 bucket over here, whatever. So to look at the data at rest where it exists already is a huge time saver, just number one, to find it. Number two, there are already people who are organizing and doing stuff with that data where it exists at rest. And to have them have to then also make another copy and send it over here is terrible, just operationally. And then we get to data loss prevention, data retention and destruction, restrictions, GDPR and other privacy restrictions about sending people's personal information across, international boundaries. You can't, if you've got limited partners in Italy and you've got their banking information and their know your customer information that you have to have them as limited partners, you're not allowed to send that to the US. So, into an Amazon data center or wherever. So for all of these reasons, it's critically important. It's operationally more efficient, and it's critically important to leave it where it is at rest, so that it always remains under the control of the client and subject to all of those provisions. Then we create, I talked about the vector database, where we've chunked the data and vector embedded it and everything. That's the basis of RAG, retrieval augmented generation, queries against the AI. We don't stick that in our database. We give it to the client. So we say, hey, client, we're working with Weaviate right now. It's a vector database. But just as we can talk to SharePoint, and we can talk to S3 buckets, and we can talk to Box, and we can talk to Dropbox, and we can talk, in the future, we'll be able to talk to multiple vector databases. We just built Weaviate first. But we set up a Weaviate database for that client. And it's not in our possession and assigned to them. It's theirs. They own it. They can cut us off if they want to, if they lose trust in us. If they stop being our client, they still own it, right? And it's there. So all of the information that they've processed in the Inveniam platform is chunked and vector embedded and put into this RAG database for them to use. And so now they can use that as the basis of interaction with any AI outside of Inveniam. They'd lose our permissioning, right? But if they're doing it internally, they don't need it as much, right? Inveniam's permissions are for cross-enterprise permissions primarily. But this means that for the big asset manager, for example, to really do deep AI stuff, they don't have to open the kimono and give everything to some third party that they might not completely trust. They just use our RAG stuff and send a focused query with just the context information required to get that answer and get the answer back.
And this is the next generation of how data will move, right? We can either, if we're going to see real world assets trading in a digital form, in a tokenized form, we need to see it on the client's, the data on the client's on their side of the firewall within their data retention policies, anchored to blockchain to provide proof of origin, proof of state of data, the attribution to the data that was used, and the context for all these really cool AI tools to be used without, breaching their obligations, their data obligations. And this is really transformational because we either need the world's largest referenceable database for private market assets to trade, or we need a decentralized solution. And this is the decentralized solution, the next generation that allows the next generation of computational tools that are huge, right? This Inception database or data centers are the first two are in the US, right? They're really tens of billions of dollars of NVIDIA chips are in these massive data centers in the United States. The third one's being built in Switzerland right now. It's 100 some odd exaflop of computational power being built right now. I think it's 30 some odd exaflop that is active and live today. Microsoft and G42 are the prime investors in this. Silver Lake is a big investor. But for people to use that for private market data, it's not possible without using our tool to use this. And what it does is it allows you to use these massive computational tools for huge data sets. And the largest data sets in the world that are as of yet computed, right? They haven't been parsed again and again and again through multiple computational tools, is this unstructured private market data. And we're opening that up. And Kevin, you've talked about this a ton, right? High frequency traders, they are parsing every piece of structured data on public markets that's out there. What we're doing is not every piece of data, but they're crunching it, right? They're applying a lot of computational power. But this is literally opening up the door for data science to say this is the unlocking of an enormous amount of data that people can control their own data, use other computational tools, and they maintain control of this. How big of a deal is this when you think about an evolution from a Web 2 version where all the data has to be centralized to the next step?
It's so big. It's kind of hard to picture what happens next. Just this idea that everybody could be contributing to this big database. I mean, one of the more exciting is, models that could be based on cash flows from the assets. In other words, like constructing an index based on the earning power of real estate in a particular market. That's going to take the contribution of, individual asset owners who say, here's my rent roll, or I looked at my rent roll, I did the math in the usual way, in a trusted way, and I can prove that I did it the right way. And here's what I think my asset is going to earn next month, or a year, in the month a year from now. That kind of earning power of the assets is the thing that drives their value. And that doesn't have to be, the exciting thing that we're working on is these different ways of sharing where you retain control, but you reveal enough that you can participate in these markets effectively. So there are a lot of cool, that idea that the earning power of the asset can now be knowable and shareable in a controlled way. That's kind of the whole thing, but we just have to get it out there. And the point is that we have built the systems that can help you know what that number is, easily prove that number, and easily share and still control the sharing of that number. And this is a mixture of just old-fashioned permissions and newfangled cryptography proofs. There's this
these zero knowledge proofs.
Homomorphic encryption is my favorite. The one where here's where I was today, here's where an infected person was today, and we were both in line at Starbucks together, and neither of us had to reveal our paths to anybody, but the match was still found. So being able to reveal the useful part of data without revealing all the rest of the data, whether you call
And
it zero knowledge proof or homomorphic.
And this homomorphic encryption is which we've been working with for 4 or 5 years, putting it where we're anchoring data into the blockchain through zero knowledge proofs, and we start to create this mechanism where hopefully it's not just negative only, the infected touching to the other infected, but actually where value lies and where people are going to be able to say, I'm going to interrogate vast amounts of data with AI, deliver that to the real intelligence and say, I'm going to ask 50,000 assets these 10 questions or these 20 questions. Based on this, I can interrogate literally tens of millions of documents, come back with answers and say, here's the AI is going to say, here's the 60 assets we think you should look at, really intelligent person. You know what I mean? And it allows you to process data at scale that you've never been able to. And I was talking to
And the cool thing is
Edward.
that hedge funds don't want to reveal what their criteria are, and they don't have to. That is the mind-blowing thing, is they can just say, I'm looking for matches. They know what their criteria are, but their search does not have to reveal to the world what their search criteria are. It only has to reveal that both sides of the transaction found what wanted to be found. And that,
Kevin, I want to take this a step further. I was talking to this fella, Edward, who's the founder of ThinkerDAO, right? He was the chief architect of Microsoft for many, many years, and he's working with a project. And today, he and I were talking about these long dated assets, right? And these long dated assets, call it data rich, low frequency trading assets, right? Infrastructure, private equity, private credit, real estate, and ag for him. And these long dated assets that have a real mismatch to the life cycle of the technology they use, right? And so what happens is they only update that technology, particularly within a silo, very slowly. And so his business with ThinkerDAO is saying, let me take over the management of updating your technology. I'll get an insurer like Aon to say if there's a loss of revenue, Aon takes it. If there's a gain of revenue, we split it. But I manage your tech stack to optimize efficiencies every 3 to 5 years, because you're great at growing things, not great at managing tech, right? And they're rolling this out at scale here in the UAE with some of the big sovereign entities. But what that means is every 3 to 5 years, they may be trading out the data repositories. If they are doing that, how do you trust the data that it hasn't been altered in a move from one data repository to another? Otherwise, you're stuck maintaining an old language, which is what we have today in the US banking system, where you're literally sending people back to school to learn COBOL in order to maintain a system that's literally 45 or 50 years old, right? I should say that 30 to 50 years old, right? That suddenly what you're doing is you're maintaining data systems. And if your only mechanism of retrieval or interface is in a legacy manner, and you don't have this ability to transmit data without context, attribution, and origin, you're really stuck. And this life cycle of technology development, we have to have mechanisms of transmission of data that is dynamic enough to allow the core data retention systems and data retention and collection systems to robustly continue to move forward, right? And this is enormously important. And we need to get to, we're supposed to do a demo here, right? And Patrick, I want to throw this to you, because when we bring on a new client, right, and all of a sudden they have a new data repository, or they switch the data from one thing to another, these data anchors where we have these zero knowledge proofs in the payload of a block of the blockchain that can inform a system that, yep, this is the most recent version, it's not the most recent version. For you to connect up a new data system takes how long?
A couple seconds. It's fairly, the client is required to provide, depending on who the data provider is. Let's just take Amazon, a private key, a public key, and where the bucket exists. And then once we do that, we set it up at the organization level. That takes a couple minutes. And then every time an asset is created, if the client has permissioned, the user to connect a bucket or connect to that bucket, they'll create the asset and they'll say, this is the bucket that it's in. And, then we can go into that data system and say, these are the documents that are relevant to this.
And then on an automated
asset.
basis. Yeah. And then on an automated basis.
We set up what we call folder monitoring. So we'll say this virtual folder in our data room is going to monitor this folder at the S3. And on a nightly basis, it will check that folder in Amazon and say, oh, this document has been updated. These documents have been added. This document has been removed. And it will update that in our platform so that the next time the user comes in, they'll see the list of things that have changed in that data room, in that folder, with that file, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And
the nightly is configurable, by the way. It's plenty fast for commercial real estate, right? But we could make it happen more often if we wanted to, or less often if, that's.
Or you can manually trigger it as well. So you'll come in and you'll say.
Right. If the client says, hey, there's a new document there, you can just go in and manually kick it off and grab
have permissioned visibility to it, right? And then, and literally when you go back to use it 3 days later and you pull it up, if somebody has changed that, we will know instantaneously because the hashes won't match. And what we can do is literally go use the blockchain as a mechanism through these zero knowledge proofs to convey trust and attribution of that data. And this is why when we talk about real world assets trading digitally, right, on blockchain, where then this instrument on a ledger, whether it's a centralized ledger or a decentralized ledger, that instrument that is trading is informed by data. And if there's any entropy on that data that informs the value of that instrument, if you don't have a mechanism of automated surveillance of that asset, your data gets stale fast, right? And if there's no teeth, how do we know Edgar is up to date? Because if what you file in Edgar isn't up to date, somebody goes to jail, right? Or a company gets delisted, and there's massive economic, repercussions. When there's no repercussions, the data gets stale fast. And let's use the EMA database, right? The Municipal Securities database. There is no consequence for the large issuers if they don't update the data, because it's a state regulation versus federal, the state exemption versus a federal oversight. But the reality is 80% of the data in the EMA database is out of date, right? Where they don't do any updates, even though they have an absolute obligation to do so. This is a mechanism for automatic surveillance of this. And we had some questions coming in. And what we want to do is look at the ability for us to surveil the data, to understand the underlying asset, so we can set a net asset value of the asset. We can run a waterfall, do a carry calculation, value the pieces of the capital stack they're going to be traded in a portfolio, set a daily AVM. And this is what's going to open the door for daily subscriptions, weekly redemptions of interval funds for real estate, for infrastructure funds, for private credit, for private equity. And I think what I'd like to do is any last comments before we jump in and we do a quick demo of this. Rick, anything that we want to do before we show the system?
I just want to affirm that Ralph Montague's restatement of what he's heard here is exactly correct. Ralph, you did understand it perfectly correctly.
Yeah. And we're so Ralph, it's always great to see you and hear from you on this. Kevin, any quick introductions before we do this, or comments?
I just think I hope people are as excited to see what Patrick's going to show us. Not to all right, that's a bad job of managing expectations, but
it's super exciting. Patrick Sprouse, anything you want to add?
No, looking forward to it. Take it away.
All right, here we go. I'm going to go present my screen. I'm going to share my screen here. And all right, so everybody can see my screen here. I am into our system. right now. And so I'm live in our system. This is an administrator's view of an asset where we can go in. We're literally going in to this. This is a private equity demo where we can see these automated workflows to look at data. We can see all of this information where we then have these process oriented where we can see all of the documents, and different people are given different tasks to maintain capital activity. And again, we're pulling data from many different systems in order to process all the capital activity, the capital accounts. And we can look into this and we can say, okay, here we're going to go into a data room. And again, there is no data in Inveniam. Inveniam is a mechanism you can use to control your data, to allow other enterprises to interface with your data. So we're looking into two different data systems in here, right, where we can see private equity fund 4, and we can see a SharePoint version here, and we can see source documents that are out here where we can look at all of these various different pieces. We can look at the data artifacts that are out here. And what we're going to do is we're going to start to see, as we go further into this, we're going to see here some financial statements that are here. We're going to see the capital calls that are out here. We're going to see these are verified on various different chains. This one's on Avalanche. We're chain agnostic, chain promiscuous. This one is connected to 8 different chains. We can see all of these different activities that are here. And with the click of a button, we can extract these various different assets, documents. So what I'm going to do is I'm literally going to go in here and say, okay, this is a limited partnership agreement, right? That's already been extracted. Here is a capital call summary that's been extracted. But what I'm going to do is I'm literally going to go in. I'm going to say, okay, I've got these new files. And from here, I'm going to do this from my own desktop, but I could also pull it from a system. And we're going to say, okay, we're going to upload these documents, right? And so I'm now uploading these documents from my laptop into this SharePoint, right? So it was created. It's now in a centralized repository there. And these assets are being uploaded as we speak. And so what we're going to see is as they pop up into our system, and Patrick Sprouse, you keep me honest. I think I did that into data artifacts, right? So they're going to pop up here any second. And what we're going to do is we're going to be able to go in and take a document that exists, and we're going to, with a single click of a button, extract it. And Rick, what I want you to do is just kind of weigh in on this, right? It's setting it up to the top here every time it's here. So we now see some of these new documents being uploaded, right? So what I'm going to do is I literally am going to click a button, and I'm going to say, okay, this is a limited partnership agreement, and I'm going to click this, and it's going to extract. And so what we've done is we've begun a process where we are breaking that document up into chunks. So we can anchor it to the blockchain, and as we anchor it to the blockchain so that we know that it's there, we're breaking it apart. And as we chunk it into the various different parts, we create it and make it ready to be then extracted by these various tools, right? And so I can say, all right, here's a rent roll. I want to extract this rent roll. I'm going to say, okay, it's a rent roll right here. Boom, I click a button, and we're literally that easily able to go and send this where it's going to be totally turned into a structured document. Now, in any good cooking show, right, they show you, all right, I've put it in the oven. It's got to bake for, in this case, about 5 minutes, right? We're going to be able to go in and say, what does that actually look like when it comes out? So I can go in and see what a fully structured document looks like, where we're going in and saying, here's the information that you need. We can send it as a JSON file, right? And a JSON file, we send it instead of with a data pair, a data triplet, and a data pair is value and attribute. But with Inveniam, we send you value, attribute, and origin, or where the data comes from. So it's clickable. In table form, what we do is we can go in and say, all right, here's this asset, right? How do we know that they gave us $580,000 for that capital call? And so what we're doing is literally we're going, it logged me out because I had taken too long. Sorry about that. You're seeing a really cool security feature here.
You are.
I left.
In fact, we would never pass any client audit if we didn't auto log out after a certain period of time.
Correct. And so what we're doing is I had to relog in, and there's the 580,000. So what you saw is we created a mechanism to give you structured data in table form or JSON form with a pointer that when you double click, because I had the permissions, I can go in and I'm now through a browser seeing into the end system where I can see here's the exact data. And so what we're doing is with a click of a button, we're taking unstructured data, turning it into structured data, and we can deliver it so that your
JSON
risk.
is something that any other computer program can work with, right?
Yep.
It can be
And
sucked into somebody's data lake or fed into whatever, but it always comes with the provenance, with the footnote, if you will, back to the original document whence it came.
Right. And these can be very big, complex documents. They can be very small documents. And this is the system yelling at me that I'm not closing my windows, that I'm leaving them open. So I'm literally going in. It's making me redo that. Sorry, Rick. But what we're doing is
have 70 tabs open. It would be easier.
Yes, I know. Sorry. So we're able to see here's the underlying document here that was sent. We're going to do this, and as the template is given, right, we're going to be able to see exactly where did that come from, right, and it's overlaying that template on top of it, and we're gonna be able to see that, and rather than wait for this to happen because I'm leaving the windows open, you see the function that we're delivering, right, and so we're giving you the ability to deliver data into a single risk book, into a single waterfall, into a single carry calculation, into your eFront, where all of that data is uploaded. And Rick, we were talking a little bit about this, and we'll show more about how we do all of these various different functions. But we did a 130-page credit document, right? And we took that 130-page credit document, we ran it through Claude, Anthropic's tool, right? It cost us 13 cents. We then reran it through OpenAI Chat GPT, right? And with it to QA it, that cost us 9 cents, right? And what it did is it made sure that what Claude did was actually correct, right? In order to get this. We then took the answer to all the questions that we were asked on this credit document that we can then deliver to a lawyer, a 130-page document that we've run through 2 AI tools, and give you a structured document that then a lawyer does QA instead of them being a 2-week turnaround of reading a 130-page document, right, and saying here's the answers, or a paralegal, literally in under 5 minutes, and for the cost of 22 cents, we delivered structured data ready to be viewed and understood. When we understand the ability to do that, where that credit document never left the data systems of the asset owner, they didn't violate their data retention policies at all. And all of a sudden we see this is how the alternatives market can manage data at scale. And just to give an example, I'm a lessee of an apartment building, multifamily housing asset in Italy. And to do so, I have to sign a lease. And part of that, they go run my credit score is attached, et cetera. And they want to do this, but that affects the value of the asset. I go file a lawsuit and say I have a right to be forgotten, right? The moment that that's done, where you've already emailed my credit data to a bunch of people,
you're dead.
You have no ability to meet Article 3 or Article 17 of GDPR, full stop. Right. Using Inveniam, you can say, not only do I do that, I can cut off access immediately. Nobody has access to it. And my right to be forgotten is maintained. Does that make sense?
It sure does.
Yeah. Yeah. And this really is a mechanism for broad utilization of AI. And by the way, right now, whether we're talking about Anthropic's Claude or Llama or whatever we're using, ChatGPT, 4.0 or whatever you might be using, there's something new is going to come along that's going to be amazing. And you're going to want to have a mechanism where you can use the latest and newest tool that has the ability to interface with your data And what Inveniam is doing is allowing you to maintain and control your own data and have it ready to be delivered to compute with context, attribution, and trust, so that computational tool can do whatever it's going to do and be delivered to that end risk book, valuation solution, automated valuation model, Argus upload, you name it, whatever the tool, eFront, right, whatever you're going to load it into, with trust and attribution, so that people can begin to understand the asset so that they can trade it. And if they don't understand it, the value of that asset is less. Full stop. And Rick, what do you want to add?
So not just so they can trade it. I know you're an old bond trader, and that's your point of view, but also so they can price it better, more accurately, which is better for the issuer, better for the buyer, the investor. But also, and I know this
accounting,
is sort of
capital
indirect
requirements.
Well, right, and that's where I'm going. This is sort of indirect and accounting, geeky, but if you're an insurance company and you want to have a bunch of these private credit agreements on your books, which they do, you can look and see that they're doing it, right? Well, they have to reserve for risk, because some of those agreements aren't going to get paid back, right? Whenever you lend money, you might get paid back, but you might not. You have to have a reserve for risk, right? And the insurance companies have it two ways. They have to reserve for risk of default of the credit agreement, but they've got the insurance that they're selling, and they have to maintain certain reserves against having to pay for insured events, right? And to do that, they have to prove the value of their portfolio. And if they're holding something that they kind of sort of know about, their auditors are going to say, we call that level 3, which means it counts for bupkis on your balance sheet, which means it doesn't make your capital reserves any better against what you insure, and you have to reserve against it at a higher rate because you don't know, right? It's scary. That which is unknown is scary, and scary's doesn't make auditors happy. You get more perfect information because you can afford to. Because we've got automation and we keep it up to date and we refresh it and we structure it and we check it and then we double check it with the 2 different AIs, and we can triple check if you want to, and put it into external systems that can keep an eye on each other. All of a sudden you can say, I have an arm's length third-party valuation of this asset because I can afford to feed it to an appraiser and get it done. All of a sudden I've got transparent processes for keeping this. And all of a sudden it means, boom, if you're a bank, you can lend against it. It's part of your capital requirements. If you're an insurer, you can insure against it and have it part of your reserves. And that is super geeky back office accounting, green visor stuff, but it's friggin' transformative in its economic power for these businesses.
For insurance companies moving assets from Schedule BA with a 20% capital reserve to Schedule A with a 10% capital reserve, right? Because you have a third party mark. For banks, counting assets that are level 3 that cannot be used to their tier 2 capital at all, right? Mm-hmm. But now all of a sudden, if you have a correlation to other assets that are trading, and how do you get correlations? Better data, broader data sets, huge computational value that correlates an asset. So just like high yield bonds went from level 3 to level 2, because the pension funds actually did all of the crunching of the data, because every high yield bond has a different security package and different collateral.
Absolutely.
But even if that's the case, there was enough of a correlation that they could prove that they then got level 2 treatment for this. We are opening the door for the data for real estate assets to get level 2 treatment. And this changes the balance sheet of people, but it also opens the door for what we're doing here in the Middle East, launching derivative markets for real estate, right? And then from there, we're going to do infrastructure and private credit and private equity, where you don't want to trade the underlying, but you need a mechanism to create liquidity. We have literally a minute left. Kevin Cutterback, any final comments?
I just want to also say it transforms fund administrators, middle office and back office.
Yeah. Absolutely. And Patrick Sprouse, any comments?
None for me. Thanks, Pat.
Great. I want to answer. Josh, you asked a question about early stage and venture. You need enough empirical data in order to create the correlations. You know, betting on Pat O'Mara's grit or Kevin's moxie. You know what I mean? Which gets a lot into early stage stuff. As long as you have a large enough pool of data, right? Because you know it's like an actuarial table. You know, the longer the horizon, you need a broader data set
to
right?
get these third order benefits, Pat. But to Josh's question, just to onboard the assets and keep track of them and prep for your monthly board meeting and the communications out to your limiteds, absolutely. And the onboarding,
and by the way, that's
fast and easy.
Same day, hours or minutes, literally onboarding it to feed the KPIs for your entire venture portfolio. Absolutely, we can do that. And then you can get that data ready to allow these AI tools, 4, 5, 6 AI tools, to be crunching the data, looking for information that the real intelligence needs to go utilize. Guys, it's been an hour. We really appreciate everybody spending time here. Albert, who couldn't be here with us today, will be with us next week. We're going to do a broader, deeper dive demo next week, and we're going to talk about what this Inveniam 2.0 is delivering as it's live in action. We've got north of 70 billion of assets on our platform today, and we want to ramp that up where we're monitoring this stuff real time. Everybody, thanks so much.
Thanks, Pat.
Yep.